Hi, everyone. As Nick said, I am Dana Mittelman, and I have a very cool job. As an American Sign Language interpreter, I have had the privilege of interpreting soul-lifting promotions and celebratory home settlement purchases. I have said the vows of deaf couples into microphones so that their hearing families behind me in the pews could understand what they were promising to each other. I have been in the delivery room 4 separate times to see the babies of deaf parents being welcomed into the world. And as evidenced by the title of this talk, I have had the immense and humbling honor of interpreting for the President of the United States. Now, before I talk about that big day, I want to talk a little bit about what got me there. My job is unique. It's something that I think people have a sort of sense of, but may not truly comprehend. Hence, I find myself getting asked the same questions over and over again. The first of which is usually, how long does it take to learn American Sign Language? This is not a question with an easy answer. As with any language, they say about 7 years of continued study can result in some real communicative skill. This can be expedited with things like immersion, which I had the chance to experience during my 2 years at Gallaudet University and graduate school in Washington, D.C. At Gallaudet, the primary language used is ASL, so it was sort of like a study abroad experience for me, and living in the dorms was kind of like a homestay. I have been studying the language now for 12 years. My interest was first piqued here at the University of Rochester when my freshman year I took an ASL class on a whim and totally fell in love with it. The program here is really unique. It's sort of like a sink or swim experience. All the professors are deaf and there's no voice used in the classroom at all. I am at heart a total linguistics nerd, so I used to take that a step further, and after class I would go out for silent lunches with my classmates, and we would force ourselves to use what little signs we knew in combination with gestures and spelling and pointing to try and tell stories about our new college crushes or our fun weekend plans. I think that kind of geeky aspiration led me to where I am now. And while I don't love the word fluent in regards to language competency, a friend of mine defines it as the ability to have a deep and meaningful relationship with someone who only knows that language. So if we are using that metric, then yes, I am fluent in American Sign Language. Another question I get a fair amount is sign language universal? And when I answer that question with no, most countries that have an established spoken language also have an established sign language, the next question I usually get is, why? And sometimes I'm snarky and I respond, well, why isn't there one spoken language in the world? But really the answer discusses the beautiful diversity of sign languages all over the world, some of which have made the determined growth from a home gestural system that grew into an established language, some of which have crossed oceans and found homes in new countries. For example, ASL is based in Langue Signe Français, or French Sign Language, so I could probably more easily converse with a French deaf person than, say, a British deaf person who uses an entirely different sign language than American Sign Language. Isn't diversity a beautiful thing? Another question I get with alarming frequency is, so you know Braille? When people ask that, I usually just look at them like this until the answer just comes to them. Some people's only exposure to ASL interpreters have been in that little box in the corner of their screen on the Sunday morning religious broadcasts. So before you ask, no, I have never been in the box in the corner of this TV screen, save for some extraordinary events, such as interpreting for the president, which I promise I'm getting to. Most of my gigs, as I like to call them because I think it makes me sound like a cool musician, are typically lower profile. My average day could be interpreting a meeting about recruiting interns with disabilities for the government, or interpreting a culinary class at a community college, or interpreting a physical therapy appointment for a post-surgical deaf patient, or interpreting a budget meeting between a deaf economic analyst and his supervisor. Sometimes my work is fascinating and fulfilling. Sometimes it is complicated and demanding. And sometimes it's really boring. But to me, and that's the crux of my job, I don't own the content of the interaction. While I may not be particularly jazzed about interpreting a government IT meeting, my deaf consumer has chosen this as her work, and it's my responsibility to make sure that that important information is made accessible to her. In not owning the content of the interaction, I am ideally supposed to be as inconspicuous as possible in an interpreted interaction. I am ideally an invisible participant. Sometimes this is really easy, and sometimes it's incredibly difficult. If a hearing supervisor is reprimanding his deaf employee, whom I know has had a terrible week, I have to suppress my urge to soften the supervisor's tone and language when I put it into ASL. If a hearing woman is having a heated debate about gay marriage with her deaf acquaintance, despite the fact that her words are coming out of my mouth, I have to remind myself that her words are not my own. And when a deaf client is detailing the emotional specifics of her childhood sexual assault to her hearing therapist, I have to consciously will my own emotions to abate. Now, that task of pushing my emotions aside was nearly inconceivable on Memorial Day 2012, when I was totally abuzz with excitement over interpreting for President Barack Obama. At the time, I was working for a sign language interpreting agency that sent me on different jobs every day, mostly in the government. A few days before Memorial Day, they sent out a request to interpret an event at the Vietnam Wall on Memorial Day. There was no speaker listed, but I still jumped at the job because my fantastic mother was a nurse in Vietnam, and so I felt a somewhat unique connection to the event. Unfortunately, the job had already been snatched up, again, despite not knowing who the speaker was going to be. Interpreters often walk into events not knowing what we were about to actually interpret. However, as the days unfolded and the details emerged that the big guy was going to be there, my dear friend who had secured the job offered it to me. She had already had the opportunity to interpret for the president earlier in the year and wanted to provide me with the same unique opportunity. Needless to say, I sent her a very large bouquet of flowers the following week. When the holiday arrived, my co-interpreter and I made our way down to the National Mall. It was a balmy 98 degrees out that day, and the mall was teeming with veterans and tourists and their families. We lined up to pass through a metal detector and had our bags poked at, kind of like what you would expect at a baseball game. I was admittedly expecting some tighter security, especially when we found out where we would be standing, which was a little confusing to figure out. The coordinators didn't know where to put us. At first it was, okay, you're on the stage. No, you're off in the corner somewhere. No, you're gonna be near the military band. No, I don't think we need interpreters. Oh, wait, come back, yes, we do. We were finally placed right inside the gates surrounding the stage where the president would speak. My co-interpreter and I nervously introduced ourselves to the Secret Service agent who was standing in our corner, and we explained in gross detail about how we're the sign language interpreters, and we're gonna be switching every 15 to 20 minutes, and he was more than welcome to check our bags again, or pull up a credit history, or call the FBI with our social security numbers, whatever he needed, we would totally do. He literally looked at us like we posed the threat level of a pair of kittens, and he shrugged and goes, whatever, guys, that's fine. As the sun beat down on the veterans and their families, the program began, moderated by actor Tom Selleck, whose name sign we joked was this. Despite my childhood affection for the movie 3 Men and a Baby, and my general awe of being in such close vicinity to some of the other speakers, such as Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, nothing could match the utter blood rush that occurred when Selleck introduced the President of the United States of America. The snare drum of the military band started playing the first few measures of Hail to the Chief as Barack and Michelle Obama and Joe and Jill Biden strode through the curtain at the end of the walkway, down the path and onto the stage right next to where I was standing. I had to bite my tongue and clasp my hands in front of me to prevent myself from turning to my co-interpreter and going, so there I am. Here's the thing. President Obama is really easy to interpret for. After I took a couple deep breaths to calm my nerves and quell my shaking hands, I focused on the task of interpreting, and the president made it really easy on me. He speaks very slowly and carefully. His sentences are linear, and his thought process is so clear that sometimes you can predict what he's going to say next. This is in contrast to former President Clinton, whose keynote address I had the opportunity to interpret at an environmental conference a few years ago. Old Billy is jokey and tangential and sometimes entirely incomprehensible with his Southern accent, but President Obama was an absolute dream. Towards the end of his speech, he took time to show gratitude to the veterans. He noted how they hadn't been properly thanked in the same way that we've honored vets from Iraq and Afghanistan in the past few years. I immediately thought of my mother and heard her stories of returning from Vietnam to an entirely unwelcoming public. And so when the president turned to the crowd and said, "Because you haven't heard it enough, thank you. We appreciate you. Welcome home. Welcome home. Welcome home." And I signed, that whole task of pushing my emotions aside became insurmountable. I, like my mother, am a little bit of a crier, and in that profound moment, my role as the daughter of a veteran completely trumped the emotionless ethics of a professional sign language interpreter. As the president wrapped up his powerful yet succinct speech, he took his wife's hand as the crowd rose to their feet in applause, and he walked down the stairs right behind me, and feet from me, he stopped, and he looked me in the eyes and smiled broadly and said, "Thank you." The blood roared in my ears, and I said the only thing I could think to say in that moment, which was, "Thank you." I think in retrospect, I was thanking him for honoring my mother and just thanking the universe for leading me to that extraordinary experience. And thank you for letting me share it with you today.